The room was already settled. The food had already been approved. And the man at the center of the table had already survived worse than this. What no one accounted for was the woman holding the tray. The poison wasn't obvious. It wasn't sloppy. It was elegant, designed for someone who never questioned what was placed in front of him. Park Jun-hyuk never knew. Because power rarely does. The venue didn't look like a place where mistakes happened. Glass, steel, low music calibrated to calm men who carried violence quietly. Private dining. Private security. Every detail engineered to convince important people that nothing could reach them here. Nia Calder moved through the room the way she always did. Unnoticed. Black uniform. Steady hands. Eyes trained forward, not curious. In rooms like this, curiosity was interpreted as ambition. And ambition got corrected fast. She wasn't looking for trouble. She wasn't watching the boss. She was watching the food. The plate meant for Park Jun-hyuk radiated heat differently than it should have. Too sharp. Too eager. The aroma lingered where it should have settled. A clean presentation carrying something that didn't belong. Nia slowed her steps by half a second. If she was wrong, nothing would happen. If she was right, everything would. The plate was already being set down. The moment was already passing. There would be no second look, no security check, no dramatic interruption. Men like Park Jun-hyuk didn't wait for confirmations. So Nia made a choice no one would thank her for. She adjusted the service order. Smooth motion. Routine enough to be ignored. A swap that looked like professionalism and felt like stepping off a ledge. The plate changed places. No one reacted. No voices rose. The music didn't stop. But something in the room tightened. Subtle, invisible, irreversible. Because somewhere nearby, someone realized their timing had failed. And somewhere at the table, a man who controlled empires paused. Not because he sensed danger, but because the room had shifted around him. Nia felt it then. Not fear. Attention. And attention in this world was never neutral. The table was set long before anyone arrived. Polished stone caught the low light and softened it, turning sharp reflections into something expensive and calm. Crystal sat exactly where it should. Cutlery aligned with a precision that suggested rehearsal. Nothing here was accidental. Nothing here was loud. This was not a restaurant designed to impress strangers. It was designed to reassure men who already believed the world bent for them. Park Jun-hyuk took his seat without ceremony. No announcements, no raised voices. The room adjusted around him the way water adjusts around weight. Conversations nearby lowered themselves by instinct. Laughter smoothed out. Attention drifted without appearing to move. He didn't scan the room. He didn't need to. Security was layered into architecture, into spacing, into habit. Doors watched themselves. Corners remembered who belonged. Violence, if it ever arrived here, would do so quietly and leave no trace. Jun-hyuk rested one hand near his glass, the other loose, unguarded. Men who survived long enough learned the difference between caution and fear. Fear was reactive. Caution was invisible. Around him, his inner circle settled into the evening. Controlled voices. Minimal gestures. The kind of men who never checked exits because exits were already accounted for. This table wasn't just a place to eat. It was a declaration. Territory expressed through linen and restraint. Nia Calder moved along the perimeter with the other servers. Her steps measured, her posture neutral. She blended into the choreography of service. Approach, place, retreat, never lingering long enough to be noticed. In rooms like this, being remembered was rarely an advantage. She kept her gaze low, not submissive, just uninteresting. That was the balance. Interest drew questions. Questions drew conclusions. The food arrived in stages, each course timed to the rhythm of conversation. Plates placed without interruption. Wine poured without comment. The illusion of ease held because everyone present understood their role in maintaining it. This was how violence hid. Not in tension but in comfort. Jun-hyuk spoke only when necessary. When he did, others listened without leaning in. He didn't perform authority. He occupied it. His reputation did the rest. Modern, efficient, unromantic. No unnecessary blood. No wasted motion. Empires like his weren't built on explosions. They were built on patience. Nia noticed how no one ever reached for their food too quickly. How even hunger waited its turn here. She noticed the way laughter never quite reached the eyes of the men closest to him. How every movement was smooth, practiced, controlled. This table had been built for kings because kings didn't like surprises. And yet, beneath the quiet perfection, something pressed at the edges of the room. Not panic. Not danger yet. Just the sense that everything depended on everyone continuing to believe this place was untouchable. Nia felt it as she passed behind Junhyuk's chair. Tray balanced, breath steady. The air was cool. The lighting warm. The music precise enough to mask footsteps but not conversation. A room like this didn't prevent violence. Postponed it. And when violence finally arrived, it would do so politely, wrapped in courtesy and timing, leaving nothing behind but empty chairs and corrected arrangements. Nia didn't know that yet. Not fully. But as she moved away from the table built for kings, one thought settled quietly into place, uninvited and unwelcome. Perfection, like power, only worked until someone noticed the flaw. Nia noticed the detail the way she noticed most things, without stopping. Stopping drew eyes. Asked questions. She adjusted her grip on the tray as she moved between tables, letting the room keep its rhythm. Plates went down. Glasses lifted. Conversation folded neatly over itself. Nothing broke pace. Nothing announced danger. The plate meant for Park Junhyuk rested where it should, pristine and deliberate. White ceramic, narrow rim, a composition too precise to invite criticism. The kind of presentation that passed through 3 hands and never once inspired doubt. Nia felt it before she saw it. Heat behaved differently when it carried more than warmth. It rose with intention, sharper, quicker, as if eager to escape. Steam didn't linger the way it should have. It lifted and thinned too fast, failing to settle into the air. She didn't stare. She didn't lean in. She let her eyes pass over it the way they passed over everything else, collecting information without revealing interest. The scent followed a fraction of a second later. Not strong. Not obvious. Clean enough to be dismissed. Sweet enough to be trusted. But underneath it sat something tight and unfamiliar. A note that didn't belong in food meant to impress men who expected perfection as a baseline. Nia kept moving. Power overlooked details because power had trained itself not to need them. Men like Park Junhyuk survived by recognizing threats that announced themselves. Noise, movement, disruption. This wasn't that kind of danger. This whispered. She reached the service station and set her tray down with care, buying herself a moment without appearing to take one. Her pulse stayed steady. Panic would make her clumsy. Clumsy got noticed. She replayed the sequence in her head. The kitchen handoff. Timing. The way the plate had been carried with a confidence that felt rehearsed. Not rushed. Not careless. Certain. Certainty was the tell. If she said nothing, the evening would continue exactly as planned. The table would remain calm. The king would eat. And whatever followed would look like an accident explained away by doctors and silence. If she spoke, she would become the disruption. Nia had learned early that speaking wasn't always the loudest thing a person could do. Sometimes the most dangerous statement was movement. She glanced once more toward the table. Park Junhyuk hadn't touched the plate yet. His attention was elsewhere, listening without appearing to listen. His glass caught the light. His hands were steady. The detail still shouldn't have existed. Nia lifted another plate from the station, aligning it with the others, making sure her posture stayed loose, professional, forgettable. The room accepted her the way it always did. As part of the background that made important things possible without ever being acknowledged. That was the advantage. People protected what they valued. They ignored what they assumed would never matter. Nia took one step toward the table, then another, her decision settling into place with the same quiet certainty as the flaw she'd noticed. The detail wasn't going to correct itself. And neither was she. Nia didn't hesitate. Hesitation would have been visible. She adjusted her path by inches, enough to look intentional, not reactive. A server correcting placement. A minor service decision. The kind no one questioned because questioning it would require admitting you noticed the server at all. The plate was already in Park Jun-hyuk's reach. She felt the room tighten as she stepped closer. Not in sound, not in movement, but in awareness. Proximity to power carried weight. You felt it before you understood it. A pressure that reminded you where you stood. Nia placed the second plate down first, smooth and precise, giving the table what it expected. Then, without pausing, without looking up, she reached for the original. This was the rule no one broke. You did not touch what belonged to him once it was set. Her fingers brushed the ceramic. Cool rim. Heat rising wrong. Confirmation, not doubt. She made the swap in one fluid motion. No clatter. No interruption. The plates traded places the way cards did in practiced hands. The movement took less than a second. Long enough to matter. Short enough to disappear. The fork froze. Not dramatically. Just enough. Conversation didn't stop. Music didn't falter. No one gasped. But something in the air shifted, subtle and sharp, like a current changing direction beneath calm water. Someone somewhere in the room realized the timing was off. Nia withdrew her hands and stepped back, posture neutral, expression blank. She didn't apologize. Apologies implied mistakes. She hadn't made one. Park Jun-hyuk didn't look at the plate. He didn't look at her. He looked across the table instead, eyes lifting just enough to catch the attention of the men who mattered. A glance, controlled and unreadable. The kind that didn't ask questions. It noted changes. Nia felt it then. Attention. Not loud. Not aggressive. Focused. The kind that measured breath and posture and intent. The kind that decided outcomes quietly. She kept her gaze lowered, hands folded loosely in front of her. Stillness mattered now. Stillness said confidence or ignorance. Panic would have been a confession. The plate sat untouched in its new position, perfect and dangerous, steam rising the way it always should have. The room resumed its rhythm, but it was thinner now, stretched over something unstable. Laughter sounded a half-second late. Glassware chimed a little too brightly. Nia took one step back, then another, retreating into the flow of service as if nothing had happened. But something had. She had crossed a line that wasn't marked, only enforced. A boundary made of reputation and consequence rather than tape or signs. Whatever came next wouldn't look like punishment. It wouldn't look like gratitude. It would look like questions. And Nia understood, as she moved away from the table built for kings, that the most dangerous part of breaking an invisible rule wasn't the act itself. It was being noticed for having done it. Nia had taken 3 steps when the question found her. It wasn't loud. It didn't cut through the room. It arrived the way expensive things did. Calm, measured, impossible to ignore once noticed. "Excuse me." The voice was polite. Warm even. The kind used to being obeyed without effort. Nia stopped. Stopping was worse than turning around. Turning suggested intention. Stopping suggested acknowledgement. She pivoted smoothly, letting her expression settle into neutral professionalism, the mask she'd learned to wear so well it felt like skin. "Yes, sir." The man who'd spoken sat to Park Jun-hyuk's right. Not the loudest. Not the most expressive. He watched the room the way a blade watched light, without moving, without blinking too much. His suit was immaculate. His smile was practiced. "I don't recall asking for a change," he said, glancing briefly at the plate now in front of Jun-hyuk. "Did I miss something?" Around them, conversation continued. Someone laughed. Someone lifted a glass. The room pretended nothing was happening. This was how power worked here. Corrections happened inside courtesy. Nia felt the weight of the table's attention settle on her. Not everyone. Just the ones who mattered. "There was a service adjustment," she replied evenly. "No rush. No apology. I wanted to ensure consistency. The man tilted his head slightly, as if considering wine. Consistency, he repeated. At this table. It wasn't a question. It was a reminder. Park Jun-hyuk still hadn't touched his food. His presence was steady, unreadable. He allowed the exchange to unfold without interruption, which told Nia everything she needed to know. This wasn't about the plate anymore. If there was an issue, the man continued, it would have been addressed in the kitchen. Nia met his gaze for the first time. Just long enough. Just respectful enough. Yes, sir, she said. Which is why I corrected it before it reached you. Was. Not long. Not dramatic. But heavy. Someone shifted in their chair. Someone else cleared their throat too quickly. The man's smile thinned. Not anger, not satisfaction. Calculation. And if there was nothing to correct, he asked. That was the blade. If she said she was mistaken, she admitted to touching what wasn't hers. If she insisted, she accused someone in a room built on loyalty. Nia chose neither. Then I would have spared the table a distraction, she said calmly. And I would accept responsibility for that decision. Silence stretched, delicate as glass. Park Jun-hyuk finally moved. He lifted his glass, not drinking, just holding it. The gesture drew the room's attention without demanding it. Responsibility, he said quietly. The word wasn't judgment. It was interest. His eyes met Nia's, not curious, not kind. Assessing. As if weighing whether something newly revealed was useful or disposable. You're confident, he added. Nia didn't lower her gaze. I'm careful. The man beside him leaned back, studying her as if she'd shifted categories without permission. Not staff. Not threat. Something in between. Park Jun-hyuk set his glass down, untouched food still waiting. Then stay close, he said, voice even. In case there are more adjustments to be made. Sounded like permission. It wasn't. As Nia stepped back into the room's flow, she understood what the question had really been asking. Not why she touched the plate, but whether she was prepared to stand where she now stood, visible, measured, and no longer allowed to be wrong. Nia stayed where she was told. Not close enough to intrude. Not far enough to disappear. The space she occupied now was deliberate, within reach, within sight. A place reserved for people who were being evaluated. The table resumed its rhythm, but it had changed. Conversation flowed again, smoother than before, as if the interruption had been folded into the evening rather than removed from it. Men spoke of contracts, of shipments delayed and favors owed, voices low and precise. No one mentioned the plate. No one mentioned her. That was the test. Power didn't threaten first. It observed. It let silence do the work fear usually did. Nia kept her posture relaxed, hands steady at her sides. She adjusted glassware when necessary, moved only when movement was required. Every action was measured because every action was being counted. A man across the table asked for more wine. Another leaned back, stretching as if bored. Someone laughed at a remark that wasn't funny. Normality performed. Park Jun-hyuk remained quiet. He hadn't eaten. The plate in front of him stayed untouched, steam thinning, cooling. He watched the room without appearing to. His attention sliding from voice to gesture to pause. When his gaze passed over Nia, it didn't linger. Catalogued. She understood then that he wasn't deciding whether she was guilty. He was deciding what she was. The man who had questioned her earlier spoke again, this time to someone else, his tone casual. Service here is attentive tonight, he said lightly. Efficient. Compliment offered sideways. Yes, Park Jun-hyuk replied. Just one word. Agreement without endorsement. The man's eyes flicked to Nia, then away. Another note added to whatever ledger was being kept. Nia felt the pressure in small ways. A request made twice to see if she rushed. A glass repositioned slightly out of alignment to test whether she noticed. Pause held just long enough to see if she filled it. She did none of the things expected of someone nervous. She corrected what needed correcting. She ignored what didn't. She didn't overperform. She didn't shrink. The room learned something about her. Minutes passed. And more. The longer nothing happened, the more dangerous the waiting became. Anyone could survive a moment. Surviving patience was harder. Park Jun-hyuk finally moved his fork. Not to eat. He rested it against the edge of the plate, metal touching ceramic with a soft, deliberate sound. It cut through the conversation without interrupting it. The table adjusted instantly, voices lowering, bodies stilling. "You've been quiet," he said, not looking at anyone in particular. It wasn't an accusation. It was an invitation. Nia didn't speak. She wasn't part of this exchange. That, too, was part of the test, whether she understood when not to enter the room. Jun-hyuk's gaze settled on her anyway. "You noticed something," he said calmly. "Before anyone else did." Nia met his eyes. Not defiant. Not submissive. "Yes, sir." "And you acted." "Yes." Beat passed. Then another. "You didn't ask permission." "No." The corner of his mouth lifted, just barely. Not amusement. Recognition. "Good," he said. "People who ask for permission usually arrive too late." He leaned back in his chair. The test concluded without announcement. Nia felt it immediately, the shift. Not safety. Not trust. Interest. Power hadn't threatened her because it didn't need to. It had measured her instead. And found that it had chosen the wrong person to underestimate. The second attempt arrived dressed as courtesy. Nia saw it coming the way she'd seen the first. Not as danger, but as improvement. The server approached with a new tray, polished to a mirror sheen, movements smooth enough to look rehearsed. Dessert service. Something rich and precise, designed to feel like a reward rather than a risk. The kind of offering that followed a minor disruption, a gesture meant to reset the mood. Apologies disguised as generosity. Nia caught the temperature before the scent. Too warm for how long it had been off the pass. Heat clung to it, tight and insistent, as if the dish didn't want to wait. That alone wouldn't have been enough. Kitchens made mistakes. This wasn't a mistake. The glaze reflected light too cleanly. No dulling at the edges. No soft collapse as it settled. It held itself together with discipline that felt wrong for something meant to melt. The server hesitated for half a beat beside Park Jun-hyuk's chair. Urgency leaked through control. "I'm sorry for the earlier adjustment," the server said quietly, eyes lowered. The chef insisted. Nia didn't look at Park Jun-hyuk. She watched the hands. They trembled, not with fear but with timing. As if the tray needed to land now. As if delay was the enemy. Park Jun-hyuk didn't respond. He didn't nod or dismiss the offering. He waited, allowing the silence to stretch just long enough for people to reveal themselves. Nia felt the room tilt. This one was cleaner. Better masked. No obvious flaw in presentation. No misplaced garnish. Whoever planned this had learned from the first failure. Faster poison. Faster effect. She stepped forward before anyone asked her to. Not quickly. Not urgently. Calm enough to look routine. "Temperature check," she said lightly, fingers brushing the edge of the tray as if adjusting placement. "Desserts set best after a brief rest." The server's eyes flicked sideways. Just once. Enough. Park Jun-hyuk watched the exchange without expression. "Is that necessary?" he asked. "Yes, sir," Nia replied. "Quality assurance." He considered her for a moment. Then inclined his head. "Then we'll wait." Waiting was the trap. Nia set the tray down at the service station, close enough to observe, far enough to delay. She didn't touch the dish again. She didn't need to. Time would do the work for her. The glaze began to react. Not visibly. Not to anyone who wasn't looking for it. The surface tightened, then thinned at the edges, releasing a sharper note into the air. The man across the table shifted in his seat. Once. Then again. Too soon. "Is there a problem?" he asked, forcing a laugh that arrived late. We've been patient. Park Jun-hyuk's gaze lifted to him, calm and unreadable. Patience, he echoed. Nia met Jun-hyuk's eyes briefly, just long enough to confirm. Same issue, she said quietly. Different delivery. That was all it took. The second attempt collapsed under its own urgency. And the room, so carefully designed to hide violence, prepared to close around the person who'd brought it to the table. The room didn't tighten all at once. Narrowed. Nia felt it in the pauses between breaths, in the way voices resumed at half volume, careful not to lean too far into silence. Waiting stretched thin, delicate enough to snap if handled wrong. She didn't move. Movement now would give the wrong people something to react to. Delay was doing its work. It always did. The dessert sat where she'd placed it, untouched, cooling at a pace that made the lie harder to maintain. Time stripped away the polish. Heat bled off. The sharpness beneath the sweetness had nowhere left to hide. Across the table, the man who'd spoken too soon tried to recover his ease. He reached for his glass, then stopped, fingers hovering as if unsure whether permission was required. His smile returned in pieces, never quite assembling correctly. Conversation limped forward. Someone mentioned a shipment. Someone else nodded too fast. The rhythm of the evening kept going, but it was out of sync now, like a song played half a beat late. Park Jun-hyuk said nothing. That was the cruelty of it. If he'd ordered the dessert removed, the moment would have ended cleanly. If he'd accused anyone, chaos would have rushed in to fill the space. Instead, he let time sit between them like a mirror. People always revealed themselves when nothing happened. The server who'd brought the tray stood a little too straight at the edge of the room, eyes fixed forward, waiting for a cue that never came. Sweat gathered at his temple despite the cool air. He shifted his weight, then corrected himself when he noticed he'd been noticed. Nia watched the reactions ripple outward. Subtle, telling. One man leaned back relieved. Another leaned forward tense. A third checked his phone, pretending disinterest while counting seconds. Delay was exposure. She adjusted a spoon on the service station, angling its polished surface toward the dessert without touching it. The metal caught the vapor as it rose, faint and wrong. A discoloration bloomed along the edge, barely visible, but undeniable once seen. She didn't announce it. She let Park Jun-hyuk see. His gaze flicked to the spoon, then back to the table. No reaction, no signal. But something settled behind his eyes, the quiet certainty of a conclusion reached. The man across from him cleared his throat. Perhaps we should move on, he said too quickly. No need to let dessert slow the evening. Low. The word landed poorly. Park Jun-hyuk turned his head just enough to acknowledge him. I prefer to finish things properly, he replied. The man nodded, swallowing. His fingers tapped the table once. Then stilled when he realized he'd done it. Nia stepped back, hands folded, her part complete. Delay had done what accusation never could. It had given everyone enough rope to choose what to do with it. Time passed. Not much, just enough. And in that quiet stretch, the trap closed. Not with force, but with inevitability. The first mistake was impatience. It came disguised as confidence, carried on a smile that arrived a fraction too late. The man across from Park Jun-hyuk shifted in his chair, easing back as if bored by the pause, as if nothing in the room had changed. That alone would have meant nothing. It was the second movement that mattered. He reached for his glass. Not hurried, not panicked, just quick enough to suggest he wanted something, anything to break the waiting. The crystal barely lifted from the table before another hand settled over his wrist. Gentle, firm, unavoidable. Not yet, the voice said pleasantly. The man froze. Conversation around them thinned, then smoothed over itself again, the way people pretended not to see what they very clearly did. Plates were cleared at neighboring tables. Wine was poured. Someone laughed too loudly at a private joke. The illusion held. Barely. The man's smile stayed in place, stretched thin now. Is there an issue? he asked, trying for lightness. We've been sitting here long enough. Park Jun-hyuk looked at him then. Not sharply. Not with anger. With calm interest. As if noticing a detail that had been present all along. Have we? He asked. The man swallowed. The movement was visible in his throat, the kind you couldn't train away once the body decided to betray you. His fingers twitched under the hand restraining him, testing pressure, gauging options. There were none. Nia watched from her position near the service station, breath steady, gaze lowered. She didn't need to look at his face to know what it showed. She'd seen it before in smaller rooms in less polished men. Relief turning into fear. The hand on his wrist withdrew slowly, not releasing him, just reminding him where control sat. Another man appeared beside his chair, adjusting the space without touching it. A third lingered behind, blocking nothing obvious, just enough. Space disappeared quietly. I think we're done here, the man said, his voice cracking on the last word. He tried to stand. Pressure returned to his shoulder this time. Friendly. Anchoring. Careful, the same pleasant voice said. You'll draw attention. The irony landed too late. Park Jun-hyuk leaned back slightly, watching the scene unfold as if it were an inevitable conclusion rather than an intervention. He didn't need to give orders. His table understood what movement meant and what it cost. Walk, someone murmured. The man hesitated, then complied. He was guided away without resistance, steps measured, unhurried. To anyone glancing over, it looked like an escort to a private conversation. Respectful, discreet. The music swelled just enough to cover the scrape of a chair. When the space he'd occupied emptied, the room exhaled. Park Jun-hyuk lifted his glass at last, taking a slow sip as if nothing unusual had occurred. His gaze drifted briefly toward Nia. Not gratitude, not warning, recognition. The enemy had exposed himself without accusation, without a name spoken aloud. All it had taken was time, and the wrong man moving too soon. The room returned to itself with practiced ease. Chairs shifted back into place. Glasses were refilled. Conversations resumed as if nothing irreversible had just happened. The elegance held because it always did. This was a place designed to absorb disturbance without showing the bruise. Nia remained where she was. She felt the absence more than the capture, the empty chair like a punctuation mark no one acknowledged. Attention had moved on, but it hadn't released her. It had narrowed. Park Jun-hyuk set his glass down and finally turned toward her. The motion was unhurried, deliberate enough to gather the room without demanding it. Voices softened, laughter thinned. Men who didn't look at him directly felt the shift anyway. Come closer, he said. Not loud, not sharp, certain. Nia stepped forward. One pace, then another. Each step placed carefully, not because she was afraid of tripping, but because everything she did now would be remembered. She stopped at a respectful distance, hands folded, posture steady. You acted twice, he said. Once without permission. Once without hesitation. Yes, sir. You didn't accuse anyone. No. He studied her face, not searching for fear. Measuring restraint. People begged when they wanted protection. Bargained when they wanted reward. Nia did neither. What were you willing to lose? He asked. The question wasn't rhetorical. It was surgical. Nia didn't rush to answer. Silence here was safer than ornament. My job, she said. My freedom. Possibly my life. A ripple moved through the table. Not shock. Recognition. And if you'd been wrong, then I would have disrespected you, she replied evenly. And I would accept whatever followed. Park Jun-hyuk held her gaze a moment longer, then leaned back, exhaling slowly. Control settling back into place. You understand, he said, that intervening doesn't earn safety. Yes. In fact, he continued, it tends to remove it. I know. A corner of his mouth lifted. Not a smile. A decision. Good, he said. Invisible people don't last long in my world. He reached for his glass again, the signal subtle but absolute. Table breathe. The danger didn't leave. Settled. Stay close, he added, as if commenting on service flow. Tonight isn't finished. Nia inclined her head and stepped back into position, the weight of his attention following her like a shadow. She felt it in the way eyes recalibrated, in the way space adjusted around her. She hadn't been thanked. She'd been marked. As service resumed, Nia caught her reflection in the polished surface of a tray. Same uniform, same stillness, different gravity. The room no longer looked through her. It looked at her. Park Jun-hyuk survived because she acted. And now, standing where she could no longer disappear, Nia understood the truth beneath the elegance. Being seen by the king wasn't protection. It was the beginning of a much more dangerous kind of belonging.